So for anyone in already, thank you so much for joining. I'm Dave Fano, founder and CEO at Teal. But more importantly, today we're with my Quasia Chambers. And I could gush on about your transition from being a teacher to a recruiter, but it's probably a lot better if you do it yourself. So can you tell us a little bit about you?
Awesome. Yeah. So I'll hop right in and let everyone know. I'm Mike Quasia again. And as far as my transition went, it definitely wasn't easy. So I'll start there. Well, I started as a middle school teacher, and I was doing that for about 5 years. And as a middle school teacher, it was definitely a great experience. I loved my students. I actually still miss them and still connected to them and talk to them every now and then. But I found out through teaching, it was time that I had to focus on me. When the pandemic hit, I was extremely exhausted with the day to day work life of being a teacher. And as I'm connecting with like plenty of teachers online, the story pretty much has been the same for all of us. We're overworked and underpaid. So, that was part of the reason why I had to make that shift. Like I said, during that pandemic time, I definitely became very unhappy because I didn't get a chance to see my students. I was behind the screen. Um,
Mm,
and as you know, you go to school to become this teacher and change lives and, make change for students. And you have to do that and impact them in person. So trying to make that same impact in front of students behind the screen was very tough.
mm.
A lot of my students were impacted by COVID, their parents. So it was tough to see that for my students. So I was just like, this is a time where I need to focus on myself and make that transition to somewhere else. So I found myself going into still sticking with students, of course, because I just thought that that's where my streamline of education was and that's where my passion was. So I continued on to be a recruiter for my alma mater at Bloomfield College. So from there, I was just like, hey, recruiting is, definitely my jam. And maybe I can, streamline my way right on into recruiting in tech. I always saw everyone like transitioning from teaching to tech. And of course, all over TikTok. And I'm just like, maybe I can do this too. So I started just connecting, and leveraged my LinkedIn as much as I could and connected with so many people. And then I got a chance to just use my platform to connect with so many people that someone actually reached out to me and said, hey, I want to help you. I think that you deserve a chance. And this is how you can do it. Like you already have some experience in recruiting. So let's leverage those skills that you already have. They're transferable. I know you've seen that all over LinkedIn. And of course, Teal, that's what you use Teal for. And then I made the transition within the next 6 months of leaving my recruiting position as a recruiter at my alma mater. So that's a
Very
little bit about me.
That's awesome. So, I like to get into the nitty gritty on these things because I feel like a lot of these conversations are like very high level, and everyone's like, "That's awesome, I get it." I want to know tell me how you did it. Like, I want the tips. So, um, as a teacher,
Mhm.
um, kind of what was that process like for you? When you were still teaching. Obviously, there's like a summer break. Some people teach summer school. There's like kind of natural breaks in teaching and these like pausing moments, but kind of what can you talk us through the kind of progression to, okay, that's it. There's kind of like, I oftentimes like when you're in a relationship, like, okay, I think we're gonna break up. And then there's like all like the heartache and sort of mental anguish and like actually having the conversation. So
Mhm.
walk me through like I'm making a change and then like, okay, I'm taking action, I'm job searching, like, okay, I'm done. I like turned in my notice that I'm not teaching next semester.
Right. So I think what that transition was like for me, or that moment of like aha, right, was when my last career didn't really appreciate me when it came to my personal life.
Mm,
It sounds pretty crazy, right? But it's real because my father dealt with lung cancer.
Mm.
So he's a survivor, thank God, and he is in remission. So
That's awesome. Congrats.
during that, yeah, during that time, he was, doing chemo and things like that. So I had to take care of him and just had to be supportive of him. And I let my job know that. And unfortunately, it wasn't, on in my favor, let's say.
Mhm.
So that was really, really unfortunate. And I was just
Mhm.
like, if I'm working for a place that doesn't really care about my livelihood outside of work so that I'm okay to show up for these students, I'm not
Mhm.
sure if this is okay to continue long term. I'm very, very young. I'm 27. So I'm just like, if this is how it's going to end up for me long term, I'm not really sure if this is where I want to continue. I'm really, really big on work life balance, and I'm
Mhm.
really, really glad to be in a space where I can, you know, own in on my work life balance. So yeah, that was the moment for me.
And
Yeah.
then what did you I'm so happy he's okay.
Yes.
Um, so then what did you start to do, right? Like, kind of talk me through that, right? You're like, "Okay, I'm a teacher. I'm trained in this. This is what I do."
Right.
Like, I mean, I could yeah, walk me through, like, you made the decision, "This isn't for me." Like, what started to help you figure out what was next?
Right. So I feel like just using LinkedIn, I just used that search engine, right? I said teacher to tech, see if any of
Mm.
those keywords came up. And I would see a lot of LinkedIn teachers that have pivoted into tech. So I've seen a lot of customer success, people that were in project management,
Mhm.
a lot of people that went into instructional design. So these are all of the roles I did research on and thought that I wanted to do because
Mhm.
those were the seemed like the easy route to go.
Mhm.
But I was just like, that just doesn't fit me either. I mean, I have all of this, background in instructional design and, all this background, caring for customers or let's say parents because we couldn't use customers. But
Mhm.
I just made sure I was researching each title to see what suited me best.
Mhm.
Just sit with myself and understand, hey, what am I really passionate about? And my passions were helping people. I mean, I helped students, so I'm just like, well, maybe I can help people now and transition that skill of help. Yeah.
That's and so what even like, because I'm just so curious, even the teachers to tech part,
Right.
right? Because in a lot of the conversations I've done, what I feel is almost like the biggest impediment is just like a lack of awareness, right? I feel like a lot of people just do. I wouldn't be surprised if there's other teachers in your family.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, and so it's you kind of just like you go like with where the current takes you, and it's not even that. It's like it's just what I know, right? Oh, my dad was an architect. Now I'm an architect. I know what that looks like. I know what that. There's very little surprises. I understand. My dad was a lawyer. I become a lawyer. My parent was a teacher. I become a teacher.
Yes.
Um, and so the idea of tech more broadly, like one, how did that come about, and what did that mean to you?
So what it meant to me was, for one, we always used technology in the classroom.
Mm.
So I was a big stickler on let's make sure that the students know how to use a laptop. Let's make
Mm.
sure that they know how to place their hands on the keyboard and use it because they're going to need these skills when they get older, right? That skills thing, right? So just
Mhm.
knowing that technology is going to be our future. And I'm just like, well, maybe it is my future next. So I have to get acclimated to this. I think it was important for me to understand if I wanted to go into educational technology or that big
Mhm.
tech. And I was seeing a lot of teachers go into ed tech because it was close
Mhm.
to a lot of information that we would use with our students, like different companies like Nearpod, Vocabulary. These were,
Mhm.
normal to me. I've used them. I know the platforms. However, it didn't mean that I knew about the tech world, right? It didn't mean
Mhm.
that I knew how to interview for these places. So I made sure I did the research on where I wanted to go and what these, different companies could offer me, what I would need to research when it comes time to interview. And big, big culture shock, but it did a lot of service to me in the long run.
Yeah, that's a great point because I think folks don't recognize or appreciate their domain knowledge. And I think when it comes to jobs, there's a big part between like skills or abilities and domain or environmental knowledge. Actually, I think environments is kind of a third one, right? But a teacher, has a domain knowledge on education and what it
Right.
means to educate and transfer knowledge from one thing to another, you know. And then there's a lot of software that is built to do that. There's a lot of tech to do that. To your point, there's higher ed, sort of, they don't call it lower ed. I don't know what the word is for it. But software at all the varying levels of education. And so I
Mhm.
think, seeing that I can still use this domain knowledge. And I talk to a lot of people about that, is like, say I love rock climbing. I'm too out of
Right.
shape to do that, but we'll go with that as an example. Um, but I don't want that to be my job. I don't want to be a professional rock climber. I could still go work at a company. There's a company called it's like a trails hiking app, right? And so I
Mhm.
could be involved in the domain. My passion and expertise in the field of just like as a passion project could help me
Mhm.
being a software engineer there, a salesperson there, a marketer there, right? I might be the best marketer on the planet because I'm so passionate about the product, but I don't need the activity. And so I think the same goes for teaching. I can still be passionate about teaching. I can still be passionate about people, learning and growing, but that doesn't mean I have to be a teacher.
Yes. Yes. I completely began thinking about that whole narrative of not even being a teacher anymore. I know a lot of teachers go through that whole mindset of, oh, my students are going to miss me. Oh, I'm letting my students down. But I felt in
Mm.
that moment I had to choose me. Like I'll just keep saying that because it's like choosing you is just the most important part of this job transition or career transition, excuse me, because you're choosing what you want to do and you have to enjoy doing that regardless of, you know, who you may let down. The most important part is not letting yourself down.
Yeah, this is another topic that I feel pretty strongly about, that selfish is not a bad word,
Yes.
right? Like we have turned that. It's like, oh, you're selfish. It's like, yes, my blood cells feed my body first. My skin like regenerates on me first. It's like biologically, that's what we're supposed to do. That's like we are engineered to do. And
Yeah.
I always love the analogy on the airplane. I was like, you got to put the air mask on you first. Everyone's like, oh, why wouldn't you put it on your kid first? It's like, because if you run out of air, then you can't even put it on the kid at all. And both of you are in trouble. And I think that just like it's absolutely critical in the career and just more broadly in life in general. You got to take care of yourself first. And you can't do that job. And I think it's very easy for us to convince ourselves and build these narratives of like, oh, I got to do it for that. Oh, my coworkers, if I leave them, it's gonna happen. Oh, the company, it needs like, yeah, but ultimately you're not gonna be able to do the job. You might lose your job, and it's just gonna become a sort of downward spiral of all the things of you not taking care of yourself first.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Dave. And I do believe that a lot of teachers that I've connected with are still struggling with, that notion of, hey, I don't want to leave teaching because it's like, I don't
Mhm.
want to leave my students. This is all I know. What else can I do? And we're known to be the second moms and dads of the world
Mhm.
to these students, and we forget, you know, what else can we do with our career?
Yeah, it's tough. And then I read this great book by Adam Grant called Give and Take.
Okay.
Givers and takers, and then he also talks about matchers. But there's this great story about a teacher who really loved the work and was just like a giver, and it just, but at a certain point she was starting to like really have breakdowns in life, and she was able to switch careers, but then could still volunteer on the weekends and could still
Wow.
give and had a way to do it, but it didn't have to be her everything, because that was a really important part of her values and who she was. It just didn't have to be connected to her paycheck.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Well, now you don't want to do that. You want to do tech. You start searching, and how did because your first job wasn't in tech. You said it was at your alumni at your alma mater. Like, how did recruiting come about as a potential sort of job family or career path?
So what's funny is I'm like a huge avid of TikTok, and I saw Maddie Mancho I don't want to butcher her name, but I follow her on TikTok and on Instagram.
Mhm.
And she just like pulls me in and reels me into the recruiter space. And I'm just like, wait a minute, if we can do this, I'm really sold for this. So just how she mapped out how you can negotiate your salary, just the like again work life balance that she had at
Mhm.
different companies, how she connected with different people every day, and just being able to offer them the freedom and the same freedom that she had was just
Mhm.
like mind blowing to me. And I'm just like, this is out here in the world. Like, this is a thing. Are you serious? I can do something other than teaching that just uses my skills. Like, this is
Mhm.
amazing. So I looked into that and did more research, and of course went on LinkedIn and just put in recruiter entry level recruiter roles, and from there I would find different entry level recruiter roles. But it gave me a roadblock because I'm just like, okay, I'm applying to all these roles, but now what? And
Mhm.
I came across a young, well, I'll call her a young woman because she helped me a lot. But Annalise Pixton, she
Mhm.
was a former teacher and now a CEO of a company, and has been in ed tech and different tech roles.
Mhm.
And she decided to start a small startup called Preceptor Connector. And in that, she was like, oh, I can create this space for teachers that want to transition to tech. And, you guys can upskill with me and learn these different skills that you need for your roles so that when it is time for you to apply to them, you have the skills that you need. I thought that was completely amazing. We met, via Volley. That app was, cool because
Oh
I
yeah.
got to other teachers that wanted to transition. And we still have like a huge community. And what I did there was upskill by recruiting other teachers to the community. So I thought that was just like such an amazing experience because I got to use those skills, learn those skills, and of course, just get taught how to apply through an internal reference.
Oh, that's awesome. Another thing
Yeah,
you've mentioned a few times, that I think may feel a little foreign to teachers is your use of LinkedIn, right? I think there's a fair amount of the population out there. It's like, oh, I don't need LinkedIn. I don't work in an office, or
yeah,
isn't LinkedIn just for this, or isn't LinkedIn just for that? And they have, I also think people have very like tenuous relationships with technology these days. Like, do I
right.
have to use this? Like, you don't have to do anything. Like, but I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
So, what kind of what how are you using it? How early in your journey did you start using LinkedIn? Like, did you have it when you were a teacher? Or did you kind of start once you're like, hey, I got to start looking around? How did that work for you?
Great question, because I actually had LinkedIn back when I was in college.
Mm,
So they told us to create a LinkedIn. I had the profile, but I didn't have, as much information that I have on there now.
mhm.
It's completely like a resume now because it's like you don't need to go in and look at my resume or ask for my resume because everything is right there on my LinkedIn. But so I had it about maybe I would say since 2014,
Mm,
a long time. But as of right now, what I would say, or any advice I would give to teachers, is use your LinkedIn. That is the most important part of this job search if you're trying to transition into tech, because as soon as I decided that I wanted to transition, I leveraged my LinkedIn and got to connect with people. Like I said, I connected with CEOs. See, I'm connected with you now. So I've connected with like so many people that are willing to give you the roles that you're looking for, or even just give you advice that you're looking for. So I just, started posting on LinkedIn. I don't know what, primed me to do that because I'm not really that much of an influencer, but I guess I became one to other teachers that wanted to transition. And I guess I used that to I guess, instill what I'm found or researched,
Hmm.
and I'm just giving that to other teachers to like let them know, like, hey, we have the skills. They need us because we're personable. We have the skills. They need us because we're organized. We know how to plan long term because we've done curriculum, things like that. That teachers, I think we forget that we have so many skills in because we just have been doing teaching for so long.
Oh, that's awesome. So you're, very uniquely positioned to give great advice because you're a recruiter now, so you know like what to, to put on there. What advice would you have for teachers who are thinking about pivoting or about to pivot in the midst of a job search to, just minimum things they could do to make their LinkedIn better?
Okay, great. I would say, and I tell most of the people that have connected with me, I give them this free advice because a lot of people are paying for it now, and I'm just like, well, this is kind of free game. So, what I tell them is just make sure that you are showing up on LinkedIn as if you are already in that role. So, what I
Mm,
did for myself was I changed my LinkedIn title to a recruiter coordinator in the very beginning. Because I, wanted to get more outreach to recruiters who were looking to hire recruiters. So, just putting that title of wherever you plan to transition to in your title right under your name, making sure that you do have a profile picture that is clear so that recruiters that are looking for you know who you are. They know that you're a real page, you're a real
mm,
profile, and just have some of your experiences that will tie into the job descriptions that recruiters are looking for. So I'm recruiting now for data center technicians, and some things that I'm looking for to make sure that they have the skills and get hired for that role is just, they may need coding, so
mm,
SQL, JavaScript, Java, Python, and making sure that they've had at least maybe 0 to even 6 years of experience on
mhm.
data center technician. So it definitely varies based on the recruiter and what they're looking for. But I would just say that title definitely is key to at least getting some traction when you're applying.
I love that advice because I think that I tell people this a lot. It's like your work experience, you can't change that, right? That's like that was. I do tell people to sort of change a title if it's funky, like use the
Mhm.
normative version, but whatever. That is what that is. But your headline is where you can project what you want to be.
Right.
You're not being disingenuous. And so what would you tell to someone who's like, "Yeah, but I don't have that job. I'm not a data analyst yet. I'm a teacher. I'm still a teacher. I'm not it's not right." Because I also think job searching like really stretches people's integrity.
Right.
Because like that's not honest. It's like, no, but it's not dishonest either. You are saying this is what I want to be. This is what I'm projecting to the world. So what advice do you give to people when they come to you and say, "I'm not a recruiter yet. I can't put that in my headline?"
So you can always just put like inspiring to be that, or aspiring to be whatever that role that you're trying to get into. Or you can even put like recruiter, coordinator, candidate, right? At
Mm.
the end. You
I
are,
like that one because it puts it after.
yes, you are a candidate, and when recruiters are reaching out to you, that's what they address you as. So you're always a candidate if you don't want to be aspiring, because that could sometimes turn recruiters off because it's like, oh, well, maybe they don't have enough experience, right? But
I love that tip.
yeah,
That's such a good one because they're going to read the first 2 words first. Okay, okay, good. They might not even get to the 3rd word. If you put aspiring first, it's like, oh, they're not even that yet.
yeah,
I love that tip. That's a good one.
yes, because
That's
I've
awesome.
seen it tons of times, like inspiring to be a software engineer, and it's like, well, maybe you're not there yet.
Yeah. Yep. That's the part for pivoters that I think is really hard. And they're like, why won't they take a chance on me? It's like, because it's their career also, right? If that recruiter makes a bad hire and you don't work out, they lose their job.
Correct.
It's not personal,
Hmm.
right? So it is risky. So you need to de-risk it for them. And that's just like, right? If I'm telling you, like, hey, I'm trying to be this, like, no, I want to get someone who's done it before.
Right.
Um, but that's a fact. That's okay. That doesn't mean you can't get in. You
Right.
just got to know that don't make it so obvious, like, because they're not in the business of taking a chance on you. And I did a TikTok live with Maddie, and that one came up, and it was kind of controversial.
Right.
And what I meant is just more like very practically, it is not in their best interest to take a chance on you. Some people do; it's amazing, but it's your job to kind of like de-risk it for them. And
Right.
when I say it's not in your best, it's not in their best interest. Again, that doesn't mean they're not going to do it, and the chances are zero. It just means you need to know that and you have that ahead of you. So you need to do like exactly what you just said. Just put candidate at the end, right?
Right.
You're not being disingenuous. You're doing just these little things. So I don't know. I love that trick. I mean, it's not a trick. It's semantics. But it's just again these teeny little details matter. I love it.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so in a similar one, Rebecca asked in the chat. So when it
Okay.
came to writing your resume, right now, resume you're submitting it to applications. It needs to be a little bit more specific. And now you're like trying to get down to a job. What kind of tips would you have for a transitioning teacher to how they might reshape or reword some of those skills? And you said a little bit about it earlier, you're a good planner and things like that, but what are some of the ones that you've seen that are almost like no-brainer transfers from teaching abilities to onto a resume for a tech job?
I would say metrics. So that's one of the skills that both teachers and recruiters, or just anyone in tech have to hit. You have to hit metrics in the classroom, and you also have to hit metrics when you're hiring candidates, right? Making sure that those are in your resume, and make sure that they're the first thing in your resume. So
Hmm.
for each bullet, make sure it's the first thing that you're putting down. So and I'll try and give my best example. So if you have 30 students, how many of those students in a percentage, reached mastery? That's really important to, a recruiter if you know how to hit those metric points. Another key, I would say, transferable skill that would be really, really good that you're putting in there is just how many relationships or collaborations have
Hmm.
you done? Like, are you doing these things team wide? Like, teachers are always collaborating on different projects. I feel like it's really, really important that you're just, owning on that and, making sure that that's in your resume too. And then if, you don't want to do anything around recruiting, making sure that you're just looking at the job description, uh,
Hmm.
writing down those key skills that you see that appear more than once. And that's really, really important when you're applying as well.
Speaking of my language, just recorded a YouTube video today on look at the job description. It's like a lot of them are copy paste and they're kind of junk, but it's what it's the company telling you what it wants. I love your point on statistics. One of my favorite quotes, I just had to Google it. That's why you heard my loud keyboard.
No,
Is
you're
but there's this Mark Twain quote: "Is there are three kinds of lies? Pardon my language: lies, damned lies, and statistics." You know, and so I think to give an example for people, this isn't disingenuous. This is how numbers work, and they're helpful to tell a story. But I don't know too much about what you just said, Mastery, but I'm just going to assume that I've got a classroom with 20, 30 students. My first semester there, or whatever, X semester there, I got, we'll say, three of them into mastery. So that was 10%. Then my next semester, I got six of them into mastery. I got, I got three more people. That's not that interesting, but to say I had a 100% increase, or I doubled the number of students into the mastery program from one semester to the next, that sounds impressive. And it is impressive in the context of teaching. That's impressive. That's really, really hard, I would imagine. But to say, hey, I got six people out of 30, it's like, oh, well, that doesn't sound that impressive. And so I think using numbers and being able to tell stories with numbers, again, it's not disingenuous. It's marketing, it's sales. Everything you bought today, it was $9.99 and not $10 for a reason, because our brain likes it. So it's the same, right? You got to think about it on your resume and how are you selling yourself and how are you marketing yourself. So I love that you brought up statistics.
Yes. I feel like that was what got me in the door. And I got my first couple of interviews. So I feel like that was important. And then you have to also know how to speak to your resume. So, you know, recruiters will see your resume, they see your LinkedIn, but like you said, are you able to sell yourself? That's one of my I guess strongest tips that I can like leave you guys off with is making sure that you are selling yourself, not only in LinkedIn posts, not only in recruiters' inboxes, but apply to the job. And once you apply and you hear back from them, make sure that you do know how to interview and sell yourself.
What are some tips there? Again, like in an interview, and and
Mhm.
and I sound like a broken record on these things because it's the same. It's like the achievements. Everyone wants to like make the. I feel like a lot of people want to make the job searching process really complicated because they want to sell you stuff.
Right.
Um, that's some sort of magical AI bot. So you need our software to beat the bot. I just saw that on like a title of a web page today, and it made me really upset. Um, or like, oh, you need to do this. Use this method, use that. It's like it's pretty straightforward. The company said they needed this thing. You write a
Right.
resume that says you did that thing. You go into an interview and you prove that you did that thing.
Right.
You know, and so like people want to cut corners, right? Even like hiring a resume writer. No shade to resume writers, but like you need to know what's on that document. So someone like outsourcing that, you're not really internalizing it. And so internalizing it and going through this process of really knowing what you achieved and how to talk about it. So
Right.
assuming this person wrote good achievements and they've made the translation, what are some tips on how to do that in the interview? Like some things that you found yourself translating when someone would ask you a typical behavioral of like, hey, tell me a time you dealt with a difficult situation for a tech job. How does a teacher, what would be an example of how a teacher could translate that into like a tech context?
Right. I would definitely make sure that you are using that STAR method. It sounds very, very cliche, but when you're explaining that scenario, you want to make sure that you do have the STAR method in mind for every single behavioral um, response. So I know I sell an Etsy interview script that
Awesome.
lays out every single example that you could possibly use and come across. So one behavioral question I believe I use is name a time when, right?
Hmm.
And I use the scenario and not so much the classroom. I just used how I would handle it and what the outcome was, making sure that I knew how I can sell myself as far as what I showed in my resume. So using part of my resume to show that outcome and then knowing that, hey, I can achieve whatever you guys need to achieve.
So for anyone that doesn't know, STAR method is situation, task, I believe, tactic, task, um, and R is result. What's the A? Action?
Action. Yep.
Yeah.
What did you
Uh,
do?
Um, another one I like. I often there's like a car, which is just like context, which is sort of situation and task at the same time,
Oh,
and
that's
then
cool.
action result. But I think at the core it's the same. And the other thing I see people do is they try to memorize their stars, and it just comes off as so robotic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're more focused on memorizing it. That's like, you don't need to memorize it. You were there. This was you. Like, you know, and so I think like do you have tips for people to be able to deliver that confidently? Because I also think when you're memorizing,
Right.
confidence starts like it's just hard to, even though I get it. Some people need to memorize
Mm-hmm.
because they get nervous. And so I don't mean to sort of put that down because I get it, but people can usually tell.
Right.
Unless you're a professional actor,
Yeah.
um, people can usually. I want to know that like you feel it in your bones because then I might want to ask you a follow up question. That's another thing I've seen with like people that memorize star is then someone says, okay, well then tell me another, and they're like, oh, I
Right.
don't have one memorized.
What is the other one that you had?
So, what like tips do you have for folks to like, I don't know, like just like have those there, maybe structure it. Because I do agree, like the star as a framework is really good, but like how do you deliver that naturally and confidently?
Yeah, that's actually a really, really great question because it's something that I struggled with coming from teaching. I always did demo lessons, and after the demo lesson, I got the job, right? But with tech, it's completely different. You have to literally have a scenario. Think about when you were in the classroom. Think of the real life scenario that you would use in real life and carry that on to how you would transition it to a tech role. So, how in teaching can it transfer to tech? What did you do in the classroom that transfers into tech? when you worked with your colleagues on a project for students, how can that same scenario carry on for a project that you will possibly work on, on a tech job? So I would just say think of, the past versus, the future. And tie those two in as best as you can using your skills that you already have that you're just gonna keep owning in on.
Yeah, and there's got to be a bunch, right? For anyone who's a teacher, think about conflict between students. You
Yes.
know, oh, the principal changed my class right before the semester started.
Flexible.
I got a teacher quit and I had to cover two classes. Right? Those are all situations in the STAR. Maybe if you want to think about problems, I think we're all really good at surfacing problems. So any kind of like complaint you've ever had, think about that was the problem. Then uh, what you task is like what you did, right?
What you did to solve it.
And
How
then the A is
the action. So what was it that you actually did to execute? So I'm trying to give the one that I actually did in my my interview. Um, so mine were geared more towards when I was a recruiter for my alma mater. So I'm
cool.
trying to think.
Choose one of those.
Okay, so like when you're probably picking up the slack for a coworker,
Mhm.
and you don't want to make your whole team feel bad for you doing it, but I would just use a scenario like that. If you're taking on the work for your coworker, and this is your first time ever doing that, and you have to do that because you have to execute maybe a specific task, so that no one is falling short. Um, and the outcome is, your boss can now depend on you, or your colleague and you weren't really, the best of friends in the
Mhm.
beginning of this, and now that you guys have done this together, and no one is being reprimanded because of this, you guys have come together and you have a great relationship. So that brings the outcome of you have great relationships and you build great relationships.
That's
Sorry, I'm
awesome.
like on the spot with this.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Some of it's, we're beyond the questions we sent you in advance. So,
Oh, it's okay.
um, and I think William just asked a great question because I do think this is so whether you're a teacher or not a teacher,
Hmm.
every industry has like lingo, and I think we have to be careful that we assume that like the recruiter understands the lingo. So you start to like drop all these acronyms. I did blah blah blah, ABC XYZ, and the person's like, it sounds impressive, but I actually don't even know what you just said. So
Right.
when for teachers in particular, you know, is it sort of kind of common because like everyone knows a teacher, or do you need to go that extra step and either one translate it
Right.
into like the tech language or just explain it?
I found myself explaining a lot of my teacher lingo in the tech world because I
Mhm.
feel like a lot of people didn't know what teachers really did. They knew we were teachers, but they didn't really care. Um,
Mhm.
so when you are looking at your resume, take off take off a lot of those acronyms, and if you
Mhm.
are using the acronyms, make sure you're spelling them out so that when
Mhm.
they are looking at them, they're like, okay, I can get a gist of what this may be or what this may mean. Um, and I would say when you are interviewing, try to not use too much teacher lingo. Um,
Mhm.
Simply keep it skills based. And like we were talking about, using those behavioral situations, keeping it pretty much bland, for lack of better word. So you have to keep it very, very clear, concise, and straight to the point.
I mean, so I'm thinking of like elementary school teachers, but I often say like speak like if you're speaking to a fifth grader.
Right.
And I think it's kind of the same. I think we take for granted we have all this lingo and we want to sound smart. I have this problem. I find myself like tossing in big words like I didn't need to say that. Because we just want to sound smart, but actually I think we do ourselves a disservice. Just like make it direct, make it clear.
Right. And I know I find myself as a recruiter, um, being a student all over again because I'm learning about the role and then I'm learning about a lot of different people. So it's like, tell me about yourself. And it's not to scare anybody, it's literally to tell me about yourself. Let me learn a little bit about you and what you want for this role and why you're interested.
All right, so let's go on that one because I think the second part of what you said I think is really important.
Mhm.
I got to look up the stat because I reference it a lot, but a large percentage of interviews are decided like in the first 5 to 10 minutes. I want to
Right.
say it's like something greater than 50%. But um, I got this quote from Steve Dalton, who's a great job search coach.
Okay.
Um, Tell me about yourself. I think people really take that question literally. And I could imagine for a pivoter, especially being in this vulnerable moment, it's like, oh, let me tell them my whole story, like the trials and tribulations of my pivot and being a teacher was so hard. And like now I'm doing this. But it's really the second part of what you said. It's like, tell me about yourself, but really in there, tell me why you're the right person for this job. So what are some tips for folks on that part of the interview, which is honestly one of the most important parts of the interview?
Mhm. So I think it's get to the point. Um,
Mhm.
and it's not even to be rude. It's not even to be snarky. It's get to the point. So when I was interviewing, I always said, I'm interested in being a technical recruiter. I have the skills to team build and execute X, Y, and Z metrics
Mhm.
and collaborate with the different team members. So I think it's more important that you understand the role that you're applying to and what you're trying to execute there, and what skills you plan on bringing or building.
Totally agree.
Mhm.
So, when looking at job descriptions, what were some of the things well, now as a recruiter and, helping write them and working with hiring managers, but then also at the time that you were, maybe your second job search, because you had a little bit of that recruiter experience. What are some of the things you look for in a job description and what do you do with that information once you find it?
Well, first, if you're entry level, because most teachers would be considered entry level coming into teaching roles, look for the roles that may not need degrees.
Mm,
Make sure you're looking for those roles that the skills are very, very easy, like
mhm,
communicating or sending an email. Like you really want to look for those roles, and that's how you know they're entry level because they're not asking you to do too much. Now, steer away from the job descriptions that are saying, we want you to hit the ground running. And it's like,
mhm.
that might be a little bit scary for you coming out of that teaching situation because you've already been hitting the ground running. You want to be at a more slower pace, and when you're transitioning into that tech role.
That's a good one. So look for it's like one thing to look for the key skills and requirements, but also what I call like environmental attributes, right? Fast
Mhm.
paced, right? Be mindful of the environment you're going into, unless that's what you want, I guess, right? Because you can make the case that you can do it, but look for those things almost like, yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
We're getting a ton of comments, a lot of hellos. And if anyone has any questions, you know, bring them up. I haven't made as many call outs for questions because I've had so many myself, but we've got a few more minutes. How are we doing here? We're about 13 more minutes. So if you have a question on LinkedIn, just put it in the chat. We see it right here in our streaming software.
Okay.
Um, so um, let us know what other questions you have. Let's talk a little bit about recruiting because I think it's an awesome occupation. You get to help people land jobs. I know even though you sort of technically work for the company, I see so many recruiters. Today I'm like a recruiter cheerleader today. I see them getting bashed on LinkedIn and I don't know if you're friends with Amy Miller, but she's amazing. I love like jumping in and getting her back and stuff. Um, at the end, recruiting is a really cool industry, a really cool job, and there's different components to it. There's all sorts of like facets to recruiting. But given that you're a teacher that's transitioned to recruiting, tell us a little bit about what transferred over and how you like it so far.
Well, I love it. I think it's great just connecting with different people, offering them jobs. Um, and they're like always emailing me like, I'm so happy I get a chance to get this opportunity. I think like that's the most heartwarming part And then, of course, if you've had great interaction with them, they're emailing you like, I really, really appreciate you. You were a great experience. I love this job so far, and things like that. So I would say, like, should I go and run through my day to day and what it looks like for me, or
Sure, because I think for a lot of people, picking careers is really about a lack of awareness, and they
right?
really don't know, and they build it up in their mind. It's like, "Oh, recruiter, that must be XYZ. I can't imagine." It's like, no, actually, sometimes it's just this. Like, "Oh, that sounds like a ton of fun." So, yeah, I
Right.
think a lot of people don't know, like, really what a recruiter does, just like they don't know really what a teacher does. I just think we have this kind of relationship with occupations that's so thin, and so it's always
Yeah.
really cool to hear about the details.
Just diving in a little bit on what my day looks like is I log in about what 11:30, and that's when I have tons of emails. I don't know about anyone else, but emails are very, very overwhelming for me. So what I do is I have tabs for them, and if they're not that important, I put them in a tab and then get back to them later. And then if they're very, very pressing, read them and then put them in the tab. So I'm very, very organized, and I feel like organization very much spilled over into recruiting. And then, of course, get on any meetings that I have, and later on in the evening, speak to a lot of candidates and let them know about the role I have available. So pretty much I do initial screening, but I do full cycle. So what I'm throwing out all these jargon words for everyone. Full cycle is when you take the candidate through each step of the process to get them hired. So I initially reach out to them and let them know that this role is, I'm hiring for this role, and then take them onto the process as far as letting them know about the role, what the compensation, base salary, and things like that look like. If we're, allowing them to come on, the location or relocate, or it's remote, things like that. And then, wait till the process is going through, put them through another interview that they have to do. And I'm sure they're probably not too ecstatic about that, but most of them go to about 3 to 4 interviews.
That's not so bad. I've heard about like 10. So I think 3 to 4 is that's not bad.
That's tough.
That's brutal. Um, awesome. Well, no other questions coming up, which is cool. It's also I'm an East Coaster, so sun's starting to go down. I know my wife's waiting at a restaurant for me with our 2 kids.
Oh, well,
So,
time to go.
um, we can start to wrap up, but how you said you've got this awesome course with a bunch of star questions. That sounds incredible. You've got a great following on LinkedIn. How can everyone follow along with what you're doing, get access to your super cool course? Tell us.
Great. So what I do is I have all of my information linked on my LinkedIn. That I have an Etsy shop for the interview script, and then you can also follow me on TikTok or Twitter at teacher2, the 2 eyes, in tech. And of course, you can always follow me on LinkedIn. I have tons of information that I post on LinkedIn. Right now, it's pretty slow because I'm very busy, but LinkedIn is where you can primarily find me.
Awesome. Since we have 1 more minute and or 8 more minutes, and Becca asked a question, I won't
Oh,
make you do like a sort of outro twice. But since we're here, what advice do you have for a veteran teacher with 7+ years of experience that feel they have more experience than an early level position, but are only getting entry level interviews?
okay. I would probably need to connect with you so I can know exactly where you want to transition into. I feel like that's another question that I get a lot too. They're like, oh, can you help me transition? Where are you transitioning to? Where do you want to go? So I think that's really the most important part of this transition or journey to a different career. Know where you want to transition to before you kind of ask for help in this space too.
That's a great point. And it's one of the when I've helped folks work through a career pivot,
Mhm.
on the values side, I ask about, does identity matter? Right? Like we all have an ego. I don't care what anybody says. And if we've worked really hard to have a role with stature and we were managing people and we had direct reports or whatever that might be as a teacher, if I was an administrator, and now you're asking me to like go down in that level and go back to being like an individual contributor. For some people, that's
Not
okay,
mm-hmm.
and there's nothing wrong with that not being okay. I think the part that I think where it starts to be a problem is where people don't acknowledge that about themselves and that that's an important high priority value for them, and they do it anyway, and then they're really unhappy.
Right.
So then that's going to affect the kind of pivot you're going to do, right? So you may need to stay in the education like vertical or domain. You're not going to be able to do a full on, teacher to enterprise B2B SaaS salesperson,
Correct.
but you could potentially do something that is in writing curriculum for, internal learning and development at an ed tech startup. Okay, well, maybe you don't have to start as an IC. Now, maybe you can actually start as a manager or a level 2,
Mhm.
so I think you're right on. I think depending on like where you're going, how much of a drop you need to take, it will make a huge difference.
Right. And I always tell teachers to figure out what it means to you to transition, and then what is most valuable to you right now. Because after leaving teaching, we're just like, I want to get out of it. I want to get out of it. And we tend to try and get the first thing that, comes to us. So any job that we accept or any pay that we can accept because we're out of teaching. But I think it's most important of what is most valuable to you outside of teaching. Like, is it work life balance? Is it that you can own your own schedule? Is it that you can work on projects and have a deadline? Or is it that you can have a longer deadline and not be able to, be micromanaged like you were teaching? Um, just different values that you would typically think about when you're transitioning into tech that you probably wouldn't have to think about as a teacher.
So another question that just came up is so your thoughts on pay, right? It's like, I don't know, let's say I'm making X, but to transition into ed tech, because there actually is a fair amount of supply, let's say, for teachers who want to transition into ed tech, so they can pay less.
Right.
I've got some thoughts on that, but I'd be curious, how do you think about sort of compensation when you're transitioning out of tech?
So for me, it definitely was pay was important to me. So I made sure that I did apply to a role that I was getting paid more than, what I was getting paid as a teacher. Um, as far as, if you want to take a pay cut, it's definitely a case by case basis and what you want to do. So I've met and encountered people that I've connected with. They took a pay cut so that they can ramp up on their business. And that gave them leeway to, do that. So they made income that made up for the income that they weren't making in their current role. So, I mean,
Yeah.
it's my case.
The way I think about it is like where you're going and what your earning potential is. And I will say, I think like right now, well, there's a lot of discussion around compensation, obviously, but I think that if we think about comp and our time as an investment and less a transaction,
Right.
then you might be able to take assuming this is a big assumption that you have the financial security to do this, right?
Yeah.
Um, but the earning potential, right? Like I think what happened, like my understanding with teaching is it kind of like you're in, but it's like incremental, right? So it's kind of like plateaus, especially if you stay in the teaching track. Maybe you go to administration, but that's like a different job. Where if you go into tech, maybe you need to like, okay, you take a little drop down, but then your earning potential kind of like goes way higher. So you go as a teacher, I don't know, let's say 50K, you go take a customer service job at like 40K, but then you could become a director of customer experience making 200K.
Yeah.
And 200K as a teacher may be tough, right? Or not even possible. And so sometimes if you can afford it, taking a little bit of a step back to go forward. And also, I think when you switch jobs, you can grow. So I'd say stay at that company for a year, 6 months, and then look for the next one and get that 15-20% pay bump
Mhm.
because you got in. And so, what I kind of consider that betting on yourself.
Mhm.
Uh, Again, big assumption that one can afford to do that. But I would, when people are thinking about it, think about more broad earning potential versus like my salary today. Also, there's things like signing bonuses you can try to negotiate for and other ways to kind of account for that.
Yes. Definitely agree. Sign-on bonuses, they give you relocation benefits, different perks that you could always get that makes up for a lower base salary.
And then, well, this will be the last question because now we made it to time. So awesome. I'm glad everyone warmed up. Maybe I just have to like pretend like we're ending sooner in our calls. So Jeannie, I think is how I say your name. Sorry if I said that wrong. Talk about, if it's difficult to get into recruiting. So my Quasia is an example of someone who got right into recruiting. So it can be done. It's not impossible. But is initially focusing on recruiting like too narrow for somebody? Is it like too hard of a transition?
It depends on what experience tried to upskill on. So I guess I was a different case because I did have some recruiting, so I used that and leveraged that experience and used that in my interview. But I'm
But that
currently
was a paid position, right? That wasn't volunteering position, was it?
so the upskilling was volunteer.
Okay.
First one where I was at my alma mater was definitely paid, but I would say you don't have to take a volunteer just to get where you want to be. But a lot of agencies, which is where I'm at, Ronstadt, agencies will take you if you have little to no experience, and they will
Got it.
treat.
What was the volunteering you did? I didn't ask good enough questions to sort of like pull that out. Where did you
It's
volunteer?
So that was at the Preceptor Connector with Allison Pixton, yeah, where she was like starting her tech startup for teachers that wanted to
Okay,
join.
so since you did this,
Mhm.
this is a sorry, now we're going over, but you've like touched on a topic that I've kind of got strong and deep feelings about.
It's
But
okay.
I also think it's kind of especially for me as like a white dude, a very like privileged position to take. So I don't talk about it much. But you worked for free.
Right.
And but it was a choice you made. I mean, I don't know, tell me about it, right? Because I think going back on the same idea of like betting on yourself,
Hmm.
there's a version of that is betting on yourself. There's also absolutely a version of a company taking advantage of somebody who's trying to make it for themselves. So I get it. I could honestly, with equal conviction, argue both sides.
Hmm.
But I'd love to hear, right? You did it and it unlocked doors for you. So your version of it working, right? There's also probably other people that didn't and it was a waste of their time and they got taken advantage of, and that's not cool. But
Right.
I'd love to hear about your thought process and like what advice you'd have for others on contemplating that. Should I work for free? I need value. I value myself. This is bad. Tell me a little bit about that.
So what it was that I didn't think of it as work because I was upskilling for
Hmm.
myself.
Hmm.
So it was me getting something out of it rather than the company getting something out of it. And it wasn't even a company as of yet because she
Hmm.
wanted to build that around teachers and not, profit off of, anyone just coming there to upskill or charging anyone to do anything. It was more so a community to make sure that we knew that we wanted to transition and use these skills that we already had and use them at a tech job. So, and we could also use her as a resource, and she also helped us with interviewing and things like that. So I definitely wouldn't say it was like work, but it was a way for us to gain knowledge around whatever career we wanted to transition into.
So the way I think about it is, are you getting value? Right. And I
Yes.
think like connecting it to just like pure dollars, that's one form of value.
Mhm.
What you just articulated to me is that you were clear on the value you were getting. You were getting knowledge, you were getting experience. I'm going to assume you put it on your resume because you
Yes.
counted it. So you got value, it just wasn't dollars. And that's where that like when I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, like money is one form of value, but
Right.
everyone just talks about free. If you're clear for yourself on the value you're getting and that time, which is something you have and you're allowed to choose how you want to deploy it and invest it because you're investing it in yourself,
Mhm.
you have clear ideas of how, and then I think you can say like, I'm not getting the value. Now it's time for me to leave. The exchange is not good because this is a person who's letting me use my time and build reps. It's going to go on my resume. That's going to help me land a job because otherwise I'm not. And so I
Yeah.
think like with volunteering, and also I think it helped that it was mission aligned and something you cared about. So
Mhm.
that, thank you, because you helped me really think about it, because I really struggle with this. It's like you have to
Yes.
be able to afford it. Yeah, there's a lot of things that go in place to be able to say, hey, I can go volunteer and
Right.
work for free. Also, she wasn't making money, which I think that also kind of, if someone's making money and you're being asked to not get paid, then I think it also gets kind of weird.
Correct. And it's still up in the works. I'm not sure if she joined us, but it's still up in the works as far as, helping teachers with the upskilling thing. So for right now, I guess it's at a pause, but when she does get the opportunity to bring it back at a full pace and full ramp up, everyone will get a chance to probably experience the same, experience I've had as well. And I do see another question
Got
too.
one more question from Brandy, and then we'll actually wrap up because now we're over. All right. How do you use being a person who goes to represent the campus at job fairs and participate in interviews to your advantage by volunteering it as a teacher from the campus? Question mark.
Not really clear on the end question, but I use my experience as a recruiter to interview. I hope that answers your question. So, as a recruiter right now, I use the information that I've gained or knowledge that I've gained as far as a recruiter. So, those metrics that I probably had to meet, communicating and working with different departments on the campus and things like that. I used all of that knowledge and sold myself in an interview. So just knowing the different, like we talked about before, jargon in the career that you want to transition to, and using that same jargon in the interview so that they know, okay, she knows what she's talking about. She's pretty comfortable in this role, and if she gets the role, she can be successful at it. So I hope that answers your question, Brandy.
I think the do was a did. How did you use? I think that's what it was. But how did you leverage? So, but I think you got it.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, we're a little over. This was awesome. Thank you so much. I think we're actually going to be on a Fishbowl live next week. No, 2 weeks. That's going to be more about like recruiting and less about we have a rerun a session called Ask a Recruiter. So that's going to be awesome. I'm looking forward to that. Again, for anyone that joined before you did your first farewell, let's just do it again real quick. How can people follow along? Where can they find you? What's the best way to read all this amazing content you're putting out there?
Okay, so you can either, connect with me on LinkedIn. You can follow me on Twitter at teacher2, the two eyes tech. And then I also have an Etsy shop that is linked in my LinkedIn profile. And you can always schedule a chat with me on my LinkedIn profile as well on my calendar. So that's
Awesome. My pleasure. This was amazing. If anyone needs help job searching, we've got a bunch of free tools at tealhq.com. It's how we found Mike Quasia. Luckily, thanks to Maddie. Maddie's incredible. We got to give a shout out to Maddie, who got some props on the show. But yeah, tealhq.com, free job tracker, resume builder, all sorts of really cool stuff. Becca Dershowitz, who's in the chats, just helped put together an amazing pivoting teacher guide that's on our blog, on our career hub. So check that out. So thanks so much for joining. If you have any comments, thoughts on how we should do these, this is our first LinkedIn Live. So Mike Quasia, thank you for being our first guest on our LinkedIn Live. And Leah, thanks for putting this together. And we'll see you all in the next one. Thanks so much. Have a great night.
Thank you for having me.